Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Safety and Public Safety Committee. I am Mark Conway, Chair of the committee and representative of the 4th District. Today, the committee will have a hearing for LO 25-0005, Crime Reduction and Violence Prevention. Today, we're going to have a unique focus on open-air drug markets, but we will start off as we usually do, overall, talking about crime trends across the city. In attendance today, we have, of course, as I mentioned, myself, and I've got my vice chair, Zach Blanchard, representing the 11th District. A couple other members are on their way. They're running a little bit behind, but I understand some of our guests today are not able to stay quite as late, so we want to make sure that we jump right into it. Representing the Office of the President, you got Shamoya Gardner. And representing the mayor's office, I know Ty Lore will be with us shortly, and we can jump right into it. I will hand off to the Baltimore City Police Department for an overview of citywide crime metrics.
Yep. Thank you, Chair Conway. Thank you, Councilman Blanchard. With me today is Aaron Murphy from Governmental Affairs. My team consists of Colonel Lee, my Lieutenant Colonels Edwards, Brickus, Holman, Herzog, and Colonel Velty, with other team members and supporting cast behind us. As we go over the slides for today, so starting with our clearance rates, we continue to see increases in reference to homicides and shootings. Comparing this year to last year, we're seeing the necessary trends. We're acknowledging, of course, ongoing crime challenges, but we're meeting those challenges based on this clearance rate. Kind of happy where we are, sir. Yep. So significant arrests. Again, BPD continues to make substantial arrests related to violent crimes and drug-related offenses, targeting repeat offenders as well as high-risk individuals. As we can clearly see, year to date from when this was done, we're showing an increase as compared to 2024 in our narcotics violations throughout the city for BPD. Gun-related arrests have increased, reflecting BPD's continued enforcement efforts to prevent illegal firearms and the retaliatory violence associated with them. I will say for firearms, if you give me a chance, gun-related enforcement remains an area of focus, while gun arrests have experienced a marginal decrease of 2% as of today. The number of seizures has increased by 8%, with 544 guns recovered compared to 504 in the previous year. I will note that as compared to previous years, ghost gun recoveries has decreased by 12%, dropping from 72 last year to 63 this year. So when it comes to felony CDS arrests, Baltimore has made 227 felony drug-related arrests year to date, with concentration in specific districts and geographies, sometimes based on the geography itself, sometimes based on our GVRS strategy for those areas with drug trafficking organizations that may be found to drive violence throughout the city. Misdemeanor arrests, misdemeanor drug arrests, we're showing 133 year to date based on this reporting, represented by BPD's continued enforcement against street level narcotic activity while integrating harm reduction strategies. BPD has seen an overall reduction in violent and property crimes year over year. Total major crime incidents have declined from 531 to 433, with significant reductions in aggravated assaults and burglaries.
On this one?
So in reference to our citywide robbery overview,
That's not me.
I am on the domestic and youth, yeah. So BPD has closed 94% of reported domestic violence cases year to date. The department continues to focus on youth violence intervention with our coordination with DGS, other city services, our participation in YouthStat, as well as our participation in Safe Passage with Dr. Brooks. Yeah. The Criminal Investigation Division has actively worked on missing children cases, ensuring a high recovery rate. I know myself, there are two phases to this. There's a district level missing person, and then there's one that's handled by the missing person unit that is focused on youth, excuse me, Steve, under the age of 13, right, Steve? Under the age of 13, 14 and above are handled by the districts. Myself, as well as Major Danita Canton, attended a training, and I was actually a speaker at a missing persons event to highlight and go over our efforts in reference to what we were doing as an agency to highlight our increased focus on children of color missing not only in the Baltimore City region, but throughout the state of Maryland. BPD has increased officer interaction activity, improving response times and crime prevention efforts. So this is a metric that a KPI that we have, as well as in our CompStat packet, looking in reference to informal and formal engagements. We expect a level of officers getting out their car, spending significant time in specific areas for 10 minutes or more. Car stops, business checks, those informal interactions as it relates to not only dealing with problematic issues and problematic businesses, but this is a metric that we also use in reference to the consent decree, showing that this is how we're trying to build relationships in the community, problem solving and other mechanisms through the officer's personal time when they're not engaged in a call for service. So the juvenile arrest report, so right now BPD has made significant strides in crime reduction clearance rates and targeted enforcement efforts. The department remains committed to continuous improvement and community collaboration. We know a lot of the incidents that we're seeing or we're hearing in the news is related to juveniles and juvenile offenses. So we're hyper-focused on this. This is a metric that we not only track in YouthStat, we track this in PoliceStat in reference to where these individuals are, working with DJS in reference to trying to troubleshoot our hotspots, in reference to monitoring problematic individuals, reaching out to individuals and trying to extract, and then those who are doing the harm to our community, as well as those who are falling, into the gaps that services may be needed through other entities.
Deputy Commissioner, Vice Chair has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Commissioner, do you know process-wise what changed? It seems like the number of cases that were not listed, didn't have a district attached to them, basically was eliminated between 24 and 25. Could you have any sense of what that process was?
So could you rephrase the question again? I'm sorry.
Maybe. Yeah, so if you see in the unknowns in 2024, there's 59 juvenile arrests. So I assume they just didn't have a district associated with them.
Okay, gotcha.
And then in 25, there was one. So it seems like there was some process change that was made so that we'd have the districts
Yep, I'm
identified.
going to get it to our youth coordinator, Lisa Reynolds. She'll be able to speak to that.
It's red? Okay.
Yep.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Reynolds. I'm Chief of Youth and Community Partnerships for the Baltimore Police Department. In answer to your question, sir, what we have done is a big change. What we're doing right now is centralizing all the cases and referrals through our juvenile booking. So as opposed, let's say a youth is arrested in a district and it's for a paper referral, which means it's a misdemeanor offense. They then send the CC number to juvenile booking. We're working with the districts right there. We're identifying what district it is, and then we're working with the state's attorney immediately, as well as DJS. All felonies as well are being brought to juvenile booking, so we're identifying the district at that point. If there were cases in prior years that perhaps the incident report went to DJS without it stopping through booking, so we can, catalog it, and there was a chance that we might not have known the district at that point, it wasn't entered correctly. So that's reasons why they were unknown, and that's why we've corrected the problem moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. And just in general, I think it's so important with, as topical as juvenile crime has been, I think with the challenges of protecting privacy, but also being able to present data to show, if we're moving in the right direction or not is also critical. And it's empowering, I think, to electeds, right? If we are moving in the right direction, it's important for us to be able to communicate that to constituents as well. So all this type of work, I think, is really, really helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of our slides, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate the walkthrough. I think, this will be something I think we should maybe do offline, but I would like to, maybe we work through the general, the way that we regularly report some of the general metrics here, just so that we're consistent. I noted this time around, we didn't have our like overall crime metrics. And generally we'll have, of course, homicide, shootings, but we also have everything else listed out and compare it typically to last year, which is or is not helpful, but I do think at least gives us an overall view on how things are going across the city. We don't have that this time. I would say much like the breakdown that we have for domestic and youth violence, we usually do that for the entire city. I noted it's not in the slideshow this time around. I did take a second to look through the XM report, and I will say we're absolutely crushing it. We're doing really well. Crime is moving in the right direction. I'm happy to see the progress that we're making. And I think you guys may miss an opportunity to highlight that by having those citywide metrics. Also, I will say it is still very early in the year, and given the way we look at clearance rates, we're looking at a 73.9% clearance rate. Nevertheless, looking where we were last year, looking at the trend that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, we are definitely trending in a really, really good direction on clearance rates. Just means that not only are we doing better on investigations, but we're getting a better hold on crimes and our ability to investigate those crimes and hold folks accountable. So I, want to shout you guys out for the progress that we made over the last couple of years. I'm really, really proud of the work that you guys have been making. I think the conversations that we've had here, I believe, have had a huge impact on the way you guys think about problems, the way you problem solve, and we're definitely yielding those benefits. So just want to kind of big you guys up.
Apologies to me, I may have sped through it. So when you talk like slides 8 through 9 and 10, I believe.
Yep.
So we did highlight, the comparison between homicide, shootings, and robberies. So forgive me if I kind of sped through it. So homicides have seen a significant decline since of 29.4% compared to the same period in 2024, with 24 reported cases this year versus 34 last year. This is as of the commissioner's report today. Additionally, the clearance rate for homicide, we saw that it improved. Similarly to shootings, they have decreased by 37.7%, with 48 incidents recorded compared to 77 in the previous year. We are, however, the clearance rates, as I said, for shootings have dropped a little slightly. Robberies have declined overall by 19% year to date. Carjackings have decreased by 8%, showing a reduction of 76 cases versus 70 last year. Commercial robbery have declined, experiencing a 14% reduction. Aggravated assaults have similarly seen decreases of 16%, with 723 versus 864 compared to last year. Burglaries have dropped by 3%, reflecting a slight but positive trend in property reduction.
That's really good to hear. In line with the declines that we're seeing in those areas, one of the big things, one of the familiar refrains that we talked about for years now has been the proactivity piece. And I was looking at the slide you guys have on proactivity, looking at it across districts. One thing I'm curious about is, have we seen an increase in proactivity, and has that resulted in hopefully further either declines in crime or maybe a little bit more nebulous of a topic to nail down, but perception of safety in our neighborhoods, having officers doing those business checks, walking the streets, talking to people. Are we seeing that increased activity? Is there an increased activity? I can't tell from this slide. So number one, that. And number two, how do we know if that is or is not helping with safety in our neighborhoods?
So I think it's all inclusive, and it's all and some. So
Okay.
I will say, the metrics that we use in reference to CompStat. So there was a proactivity slide. There's a proactivity slide versus violence that we look. So we look at high post, high areas versus the proactivity for that area. And does the proactivity match this high violence and high crime? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, it's up to the lieutenant colonels, and they do a great job of digging into the districts of what occurred and how come the proactivity doesn't match the violence in that area. With the district commanders, sometimes it is just a miss. Other times it is the explanation of, while we realized that was going on, we also had this. And although it may not have been a high crime area, a high crime driver, if we had not addressed that, we would have had something. So it's a little ebb and flow of both. I think overall, in reference to proactivity, I think because it is a metrics that we use at CompStat every week, it is something that the district commanders are aware of and drilling it down to their offices in reference to omnipresence, getting out of the car, walking foot, business checks to the point where what I don't want to see, what my lieutenant colonels don't want to see, the encouragement of the business of just don't have the sign-in book at the front. We want it at the back to ensure that officers get inside of your business, walk around, engage, they give you some target hardening tips. So when we say walk foot, between the 1500 block of Pensy and the 1600 block, who do you engage? Because if you just walk a straight line and there's no level of engagement, then that's not what we want either. So I think we have to explain the why, because it's in those informal interactions that we build the rapport and trust with the community of asking how you think about the Orioles. Hey, free agency just came up in the NFL. Just those small, hey, I see you out here today. Is everything good? Those things are paying dividends in the community. So drilling down to the officers on the street, this is what we want. We just don't want to check the box. So it depends on sometimes the district and the personnel. When we see the ebbs and flows and proactivity, it's about us drilling down and addressing those issues when we see it.
Yeah, I think, I think this slide tells us the difference between our various districts. As you probably know, every district is its own special snowflake and has different dynamics, whether it be distance between businesses and otherwise, that make it easier or more difficult to actually do some of these business checks and otherwise. But I'd be curious to see, and I'm not sure how long we've been collecting this data, but see that change over time and see if we're seeing more proactivity, one, because our caseload is going down, but then two, because we're continuing to harp on how important these relationships and interactions with folks in the public can be toward reducing crime.
No, I think that's important. So we literally had a meeting this morning with the police commissioner and our consent decree unit in reference to community engagement and how it looked in reference to officers with their non-committed time. And we're trying to track that metrics of saying, I wasn't on a call for service, I wasn't on a detail, I wasn't on an arrest, I wasn't towing a vehicle, but with this, I don't want to say free time, but with this personal time, what did I do with it? So we're looking at now how to substantiate that. Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We have here today,
I do. Now remember. So talking about the clearance rates, and I know we're still early in the year, and it's probably a little easier when overall crime numbers are down, but I just think the numbers from 2024, I think are fascinating and very important, and, you know, a very good thing. And I'm just curious as to, like, what is the mechanism? Why can we look at 2024 numbers and basically almost every category is substantially above not just previous years, but the national average? Like, it's such a massive change. Like, what is happening that's allowing this?
I think and I'll pass it to both Colonel Herzog and Holman. I think it's a lot of.
and Deputy, can you speak
I'm
into
sorry.
the microphone?
It's some of, it's good police work. I think it's community engagement and providing those tips necessary through Metro Crime Stoppers. I think with the reduction in the volume of crime, it allows detectives to get down and really investigate. Detective 101 to bring these cases to closure. Because what happens with a large volume of cases coming in, sometimes you're just triaging cases until the next one comes in, where now you have the ability to actually get in there, do that Detective 101, follow up, witness canvases, investigatory other methods to get through. I think that matters a lot in reference to the clearance rates. And I'll pass
Sir,
it. Yep.
the other thing that I would add, and in fact, good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Herzog, Citywide Investigations. I think one of the big things that we did in 2024, early in the year, is Commissioner Worley kind of separated CID and broke it up a little bit. And I think we've seen some of the benefits of that. So just speaking for myself, for Citywide Investigations, that encompasses all of our 9 district DDUs, our district detective units, citywide robbery, and then some other ancillary enforcement type of units. What that did is it gave us the ability to really drill down and focus on a lot of the investigations that in the past didn't get that kind of single oversight over them. It allowed us to kind of focus on some of the small things with the investigations, with burglaries, fingerprints, robberies, carjackings, and really drill down. It also gave, and I don't want to speak for Lieutenant Colonel Homan, but it gave him the ability to really focus on his shop versus having one commander overseeing all of those different shops. We also put other things in place that we've had. Now, I don't want to say that we haven't had these things in place in the past, but I think we fine-tune a lot of our processes. So we have case checklists. We've given detectives training. There's a number of things that we've done that I think have helped push us kind of to a place where we're at right now. And I think the last thing is just, really hard work. The detectives have really bought into kind of the modern day. We're getting a lot less witnesses walking through the door. And so, we've done a lot of work with technology. We brought resources to the department through different databases and things that have allowed detectives to utilize that technology and really, and kind of drill down on suspects, person of interest, cell phones, social media, and a lot of the ways that we're closing cases. So overall, I just think it's been the oversight, the accountability, and the hard work of the detectives that have really led to that. And we're still seeing those benefits today, early into 2025.
Yeah, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. And I think this is important enough because, from the department's perspective or from your shop or whatever, you're always going to look at, there's some outcome, right? And it's like, okay, what did we do differently? And I'm sure that's a lot of it. And I'm sure there's also, but I assume that in 2022, it wasn't necessarily like the detectives, it's not like they weren't working hard and then they start, so I just think that for something like this is actually super important, and just have us all having the clearest understanding we can of how we're in this position, so we can continue to help make sure that we stay in this position. And, I don't know if there's a follow-up question, but I just think it's a really important kind of phenomenon, and it's an important thing for us all to have a good, really chew on why exactly this is happening.
So I think it's also worth noting, Councilman and Lieutenant Colonel or Deputy Commissioner, you can corroborate this, but the way we collect the numbers, we always end up with higher numbers in the beginning of the year. And as we end up having more cases, that 73.9% will go down, and likewise will all of them. So they'll get closer to the national average. I will say, in the past, it has been far lower, about half of the 73% that we'd see. So this is significant progress. And I would say probably the best thing to compare it against is the prior year's clearance rate to show us like generally where we are, given we're now just in March and things haven't really caught up yet. So as we get through the year and we have more cases that are open, we'll see that number come down, but hopefully it stays relatively high, I think is probably the best way to put it.
And I definitely get the sense, Mr. Chair, of like, it's the winter and numbers will tend to be right, like peaks went on. I was referring to the prior year numbers. I remember when BPD announced the numbers in January. And even that, right, is still, I think, incredibly important.
It's huge.
And it does such an important, both a sense of safety and a sense of like, we are all doing our job for our residents. It's incredibly powerful to be able to communicate that information.
Yeah.
I would just add to, while it is still early in the year, we're still trending about 5 points higher than where we were at the same time last year, which was significantly higher than it was the year before. I mean, last year was the highest clearance rate in more than 25 years for BPD, and we're actually doing better than we were at this point last year.
It's good to hear, and hopefully we can keep it up. All right, we have no other folks here, so I'm gonna move on to our second part of the meeting. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We have guests here from the State's Attorney's Office, and our focus today is gonna be on open-air drug markets. I chose this topic for us today because this is an issue that I think I've certainly been getting a lot of complaints about in my district, frankly, for years on the issue. And I think we're now entering a point where we can begin to think about this issue. We can begin to focus on it. We've seen very significant declines in violence. And this is one of those quality of life issues that I think folks want to resolve. But I think the way we have historically looked at the problem has been primarily enforcement-based, and if we know anything about this issue, enforcement alone is not necessarily going to solve it. So I wanted to hear from both the police department and Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement about how we're coordinating to address open-air drug markets across the city. This is I'll be honest with you guys, I got beat up in my last town hall about exactly this issue. And at some point, we need to do something about it. So I want to hear what our plan is, how we plan to address the issue, and what the council can expect from our agencies.
Yeah, Councilman, and I'm going to open us up. So good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the public, my name is Tyler Schnella. I'm the mayor's legislative liaison to the city council. While today's hearing focuses on open-air drug markets, I want to clarify that this issue is not separate from our broader public safety efforts. The Scott administration has been actively addressing drug trafficking in open-air drug markets as part of our comprehensive approach to reducing violence. The mayor has charged this administration with disrupting both violence and the illicit drug trade. And anyone who has worked on these issues in Baltimore knows that drugs and violence are deeply connected. While BPD is responsible for enforcement, we have additional tools and agencies that we are leveraging to tackle these challenges head on. We didn't get here overnight. The activity in some of these areas is a result of decades of disinvestment and lack of opportunity. That's why our response goes beyond policing. But let me be clear that we will not tolerate open-air drug markets. Through GVRS, we are holding individuals involved in violent groups, whether connected to the drug trade or not, fully accountable under the law. But enforcement alone won't solve this problem. That's why Mayor Scott remains committed to strategic long-term investments, such as reducing vacant properties, expanding housing assistance, creating job opportunities and job training, and increasing recreational opportunities for our young people and families. And through coordinated efforts with the city administrator, DOT, DPW, BPD, and other key agencies, we are conducting targeted cleanups to address the environmental factors that contribute to this activity. And soon we'll be asking council members to identify blocks within your districts that need this focused intervention. These are critical pieces needed to dismantle the conditions that allow open-air drug markets to thrive. This is a body of work that Mayor Scott is deeply committed to, and we've seen that when we stick to our strategies and address these issues comprehensively, we get results. That's why for the past 3 consecutive years, Baltimore has seen sustained reductions of more than 20+% in homicides. And we look forward to obviously working with the council on this progress, and want to also encourage that if there are specific areas in your districts where this activity is occurring, that you engage your district command staff so that they can deploy the right resources in a more targeted and comprehensive manner. And then also just want to be clear that the administration is committed to doing public safety the right way. Without repeating the mistakes of the past, we will address these issues comprehensively, and we will continue to be strategic in our response to what's happening in our neighborhoods. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else to say?
Yeah, whoever you want to go, either Marcy, BPD, however you want to go from there.
I'd like to understand how we're addressing the issue. What is our plan? When we get these complaints, what do we do? How do we handle it? What's our workflow? I will tell you, I've had, I would say any member has had any number of particular locations in their district that we can all probably name half a dozen or more, where we see consistent drug activity that is a nuisance, or sometimes more than a nuisance in our neighborhoods, where folks don't feel comfortable walking around, folks don't feel comfortable going to certain stores, people who are operating stores don't feel comfortable going outside of their stores, or don't feel comfortable speaking to the folks who are dealing around their stores. So what I'd like to see, I know you guys don't have a presentation. I would have preferred that, because I think it allows the council to chew on the idea. Well, I want to acknowledge Councilman Schleifer, who's joined the meeting. I want to know what our plan is. How do we handle this issue when we get these complaints? What happens? Much like, and I've had individual conversations with pretty much every person in this room about this issue, but much like we use focused deterrence or GVRS for violent groups, it's a carrot and stick approach where we provide opportunities and options to get out of the violent side of things, or we enforce. And we do so with every means that we have. For open air drug markets, I understand it is much more nuanced. Nevertheless, I think it requires a similar approach. Is that what we're doing? If I have a, persistent drug corner or a drug market that we're all familiar with, we can all name a few. How do we handle those?
Yep, so I'll start with BPD, and also, as Tyler said, yes, BPD is the enforcement arm of this. So, the persistent challenges of open air drug markets in Baltimore demands a multifaceted strategy, one that integrates enforcement, harm reduction, public health interventions, as well as economic development. while I will, not delve into specific investigatory tools in these open-air drug market responses, I will say, I want to emphasize that BPD has a range of targeted strategic enforcement strategies to disrupt and dismantle these drug activities, either through the first layer of patrol all the way up to our GVRS model, where we're going over drug trafficking organizations and group member involved incidents. Our approach follows a tiered structure, beginning with district patrol officers who daily interact with these residences and these locations, developing relationships and gathering intelligence. These officers serve as, the front line in identifying patterns of illegal activity and community concerns. Supporting them are the additional discretionary units within the district, including the district action teams, as well as the neighborhood coordinating officers who work to bridge the gap between enforcement and community engagement through education, outreach, and resource allocation. Beyond these district level units, specialized units from non-patrol entities such as our mobile metro unit, regional auto theft task force, warrant task force, up to our gun violence reduction strategy teams, prioritize their efforts in high violent areas and against the drug trafficking organizations throughout the city, specifically for those that are driving the violence within the city. I acknowledge that in certain neighborhoods where these open air drug markets persist, they have plagued us in these communities for decades. There is, of course, room for improvement, heightening enforcement, and ongoing response. However, we must balance these efforts with the fundamental need to maintain police accountability for 911 calls for service and other core law enforcement responsibilities. If officers are disproportionately engaged in narcotics-related offenses and arrests, without equitable workload distribution, response times to critical calls for services increase. That is a metric we also use in reference to the consent decree, in reference to officer assistance and officer availability. We recognize that, relying solely on police enforcement or conversely relying on the other side with social economics is not the answer. It's going to be a collaborative approach. I could go on like this. I'm not going to belabor this. What I will say is for us, there are multi-tiers. So the post officer comes out, he knows that, not anymore since I'm old. Bell and Garrison is not what Bell and Garrison. I was going to say Bell and Garrison is not there anymore. Penn and North is Penn and North. Pincy and Lawrence is Pincy and Lawrence. These locations have been those locations since I've grown up here, right? So it's a systematic breakdown of these areas in multi-level. So a post officer coming out of the district will know immediately when I leave the station house, I either need to turn left or right to get to this location because I got to get an eye on it early, right? Good post officers relieving and coming on, there's a conversation, or there should be, a debrief. I'm leaving, Aaron's coming on. I know that there's something in this area. This area is hot today, it's busy, it's a lot of vehicular traffic or foot traffic, or I've observed some things. I should give Aaron that heads up. Hey, I've been trying to do what I can to disrupt Pincy and North. They live today. She knows, okay, I come out the station, I'm turning left. I got to see what I'm dealing with, and has to make that observation of what's going on. So there's personal observations from officers. There's calls for service that are directing officers to a specific location or a specific person. What we expect is in a constitutional manner, if an officer can observe these things through interactions, make the arrest, they are to make that arrest. They should have made that arrest.
Deputy Commissioner, I want to start here because I think I'll say this. we have not sufficiently addressed this problem yet, which is why I'm getting blown up about it in my community meetings. So I think the policies that we have at play today have not yet been sufficient to address open-air drug markets. I also appreciate some of the open-air drug markets that you've mentioned have been such for decades, longer than I've been alive. My question is trying to get to the seat of one thing. And this is not just for you, Deputy Commissioner, this is for the Director of Mavronis as well, for the state's attorney as partners once these issues come to them. I want to know what our comprehensive approach is if we decide that we'd like to address an open-air drug market and we decide this is one we're going to target. This is one we're going to try to help people do something different. This is one, maybe it needs enforcement and we need to take down the whole operation because it has the potential for being violent. It is in GVRS. Or it may not be part of GVRS because it's not violent, but it is an issue and has potential to be violent. What do we do? How do we know if it works? And I don't think that anything we've done to date has been sufficient consistently to address said issues. And there are smaller open-air drug markets. It's a couple of guys that we all know about. And there are larger open-air drug markets that would require a full-time, full-court press with everything we have to even get near probably still not resolving that issue. But what I'm hoping for today is a plan. How do we handle these issues? When someone complains to Councilman Conway or Councilman Blanchard about this issue, what are we telling them is going to happen? How do we address that issue? And so that's not a question just to you, Deputy Commissioner. Certainly the police department has a role when enforcement is needed, but do we immediately respond with enforcement? Is that the only tool that we use? If not, how do we go in otherwise? And how do we coordinate between the two? And in instances where enforcement is used and it's handed off to the state's attorney's office, do they have what they need in order to make sure that they can carry it to the finish line? But that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Councilman. And I don't think that you'll find a single person in this room that doesn't agree that, this is an issue. I think that with respect to the nuance here today, there's no plan to communicate to you. I think that what the Deputy Commissioner was saying, and I mean, just for me, you see somebody selling drugs, call 911. Right. And I think that for council members, if you all have deeper knowledge of what is happening, then there could be an opportunity to, in collaboration with BPD, with MONSE, to maybe try to connect on MONSE's end some of these folks with resources. Right. That's how we handle it. You see somebody selling drugs, you call 911 and the police will come. And then separately, again, if you have this information or this knowledge, I can't stress enough how important that is to share with your district command staff, right? These are folks who you all work closely with anyway, within your respective council districts, on various issues, right? So work with them and talk with them and let them know what's going on, because more often than not, they may likely have information that they may share with you that we won't share with you in this venue.
That's fine. I understand that. Councilman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Schnella, for that. A couple thoughts. One, it is, if a constituent complains and we tell them if you see someone selling drugs, call 911, the police will show up, they'll walk away, they'll be back the next day, maybe later that afternoon. And that specifically is not like that's the thing that's going to get us chewed up when we try to talk to constituents about it. I think what we really need to do is give people hope that this is moving in the right direction, right? In the same way that, the incredibly impressive changes in violent crime, drops in violent crime, give people hope that that's moving in the right direction. And I think that, and I also recognize, I had the chance to speak with Aaron maybe a week ago. I also recognize that I think a lot of the reason that we're seeing some of these drops in violent crime, like an important part of that is because BPD is prioritizing violent crime and not quality of life issues or other things on some level, right? There's a limited number of resources, and we also want for nonviolent stuff, we want either MONSE or, our incredible community-based organizations who are really doing God's work, and some of them are here listening on this today. Like, we want them to be generally leading on this type of stuff. And I think maybe particularly with like the settlement, like the restitution fund, right? Like with just all these ways of, as we're looking ahead over the next couple years, we want, I've got Lexington Market area. My district is adjacent to the commercial corridor on Pennsylvania Avenue. I need to be able to communicate to my constituents that there is, and it's not something, I recognize it's not something that we're gonna have like before this hearing is over today, but I think it's just important to be able, for us to be able to help make people confident that there is a plan that is, right, we're moving in the right direction, and like what you said at your intro speech, of like, we're doing this the right way, right? We also want to make clear that this isn't a busting up corners type of, roundup, like that we're going to do this and we're going to do it the right way, and it's going to work, right? Yeah, so I think that is, we're not going to get it today, but I think that's probably like generally important for us to be able to have.
I think for us, for BPD, and I'll speak and I'll let Stephanie speak. So we do have that, and forgive us if we're not doing a good job in explaining it to you or providing you the why of how we do it. So when you talk about the smaller one-off ancillary drug corners, that may be a simple disruption of an officer showing up, walking foot, they get disrupted, they don't come back, right? Then you have the more problematic systemic ones where we're leaning on our anti-crime section in reference to our takedowns, So we've had multiple takedowns, we have massive takedowns of those larger DTOs. The call for service, when a person does call and say, hey, look, I see Billy out here, he's selling drugs in front of such and such. Going through the 911 system that gets to an officer, that does not mean, because constitutionally, the officer just can't stop Billy based on that call. So there has to be a level of investigation. And sometimes what people don't see is Billy moves, the officer did not make his own observations of this, but also we don't see that by the time a drug transaction occurs, that vehicle is no longer in that area. So you may see an arrest. There may be a takedown or something that may not be in that immediate area, because the investigation and investigatory practices say, we don't want to make arrests right there because we're building a case, because then that inhibits the case, right? But I think even in the earlier slides, you will see in the first part of this year, we're 360 cases versus 332. We're showing an increase because now with our partners in the state's attorney's office, there's more of an appetite for this as compared to previous administrations.
I wanted to acknowledge Councilman Gray, who's entered the meeting of the 8th District. Hold on. I'll say this, and then I want to give Councilman Schleifer an opportunity to ask a question. One of the things we requested, I want to say it was in September, in our September meeting, because it was the meeting before our last meeting of the last term. We requested a plan to deal with open air drug markets. We never did get that. I want to make a request again for some sort of logic or plan for how we intend to deal with these issues when they arise, so that we can articulate to constituents what is to happen in those instances. So Deputy Commissioner, you are 100% right. There are instances where, we get complaints and we have to investigate, and in order to do it the right way, we do want to take down the full operation, it takes some time. There are other instances where we may not need to do that. I do think it is important for us to differentiate when it is prudent to go for a full takedown operation that may take days, weeks, months, years, versus we need to go talk to those young men on the corner who are 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and try to provide them resources and opportunities and attract them into something other than what they're currently into because they're young and impressionable. And I'd like to have both of those tools in our toolbox when we're thinking about how we deal with open air drug markets, because we know that in some instances, these are pretty small markets. 5 guys if you're lucky. In other instances, it's groups upon groups upon groups, or individuals in an open market for which they may be totally unaffiliated with any number of other people in that market. And so what I want is for us to understand when we're talking to constituents of, when we refer issues to the police department or to the administration, that we can articulate what's happening, a reasonable timeline to see change. And I want to be able to portray some sense that when I relay that issue, it actually is addressed. And sometimes it takes a long time, but I just need to be able to articulate that. And I've had that, we can go back a couple of years, and talking about drug dealing in front of my office, my district office, it looks much better today, much better. It is not perfect, but I'm not so worried about the fact that drugs are being sold anywhere near my office. I'm worried about the fact that sometimes people don't feel safe walking around there. The businesses do struggle. They've been assaulted sometimes by the young men. And so I think those are some of the issues that I want to get to the bottom of. And, when we pose this question, that's what we're looking for when it comes to solutions. I understand it's nuanced and complicated, but I'm just not hearing a clear answer right now. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Deputy Commissioner, I just wanted to thank you for all your service and your team. Something I always take great interest in is the clearance rates, and so I'm glad to see those as high as they are, and I genuinely believe that that's a huge contributor to the reduction in crime, because we know it's the same violent repeat offenders often, and so when they're removed from the streets, when they're arrested and the state's attorney's office prosecutes them, that leads to the reductions that we are seeing now. So thank you for that, and please relay that also to your detectives. Thank you. I don't have any other questions, because when we have questions, Aaron answers them, so no need to answer them today.
That she does
Thank
every
you.
time. Appreciate you, Aaron. To my request earlier, as far as turnaround time for
We can't communicate a turnaround. I think that's it's something that would certainly be worth a considerable amount of thought. And I'm not comfortable committing us to a timeline here today. Other than that, I will certainly take it back to the executive team and get back to you.
when can you get back to me on a timeline from the executive team?
Maybe about 2 weeks.
2 weeks? So the 25th,
Yep.
and by then we can know whether or not we can get a plan.
By then I'll update you on kind of what it could look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions? Councilman Gray?
Sorry for being late. First, I just want to thank just the entire apparatus of law enforcement. It doesn't just include our police, but Muncie and all of our partners who are working hand in hand and making such a drastic change in not only the crime, but the perception that Baltimore is starting to create as a safer city. I had a conversation with a with a law enforcement officer who told me that there was a arrest that was made in my district. And the action was caught on CCTV. The person had over the 2.5 ounces, yet when they were arrested, they were released because the state's attorney or whoever just decided it wasn't like a pound or over a certain amount. So with that being said, I just want to know, how are you guys collaborating with the state's attorney's office to create just, I guess, standard guidelines or some type of practice that everyone could be on the same accord? Because as a constituent, if I were to find this out, then that explains why folks are still just standing on corners and selling drugs. If it's over 2.5, but because of some reason, someone isn't arresting this person, they get to literally come right back out of jail, you're incentivizing them to continue to stay out there. And so I just want to know, like, are you guys collaborating? Are you guys talking about this? Are you aware of this? What are you guys doing to kind of mitigate these types of things from happening?
Good morning. I'm Deputy State's Attorney Tom Donnelly. With me is Sam Mildenberg, who's the head of our MIU Major Investigations Unit, Dave Wiseman, who's the Deputy Chief of Narcotics, and Assistant State's Attorney Rachel Adekanye, who's in the Narcotics Unit. We're coordinating with BPD all the time on metrics, and that's based on workflows between our agencies, realistic approaches to what capacity both agencies have, and prioritizing obviously certain things like fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, which is causing serious damage to the community. So we are constantly working with BPD, in the lab, as a matter of fact. The lab, has certain capacities for certain things, and so do we. So we try to prioritize based on all of those, real world type of things. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but
I think you gave me an answer, but it's troubling when you have CCTV evidence. It's all there. I understand that marijuana is legalized, but the unlawful distribution intent to sell is not. And even if it was, I'm no law czar, but even if it was just a nickel bag, if you are the intent to sell is still a crime, and yet this person was found with more than the 2.5 on CCTV, the intent to distribute. It sends the wrong message to the citizens of Baltimore when you hear of something like this and we're saying that we're going to clear a corner, but when one person is cleared for doing something wrong and they're right back 5 minutes later, it kind of just, we're eroding the trust of our constituents when it's already low. So I don't know if you can speak to that, but I just wanted to make sure that was just known.
I may be aware of the case you're actually talking about, where we had interaction with the police department, and eventually the leadership, I think a lieutenant called our division chief for narcotics, if it's the same matter I'm thinking of. But I think we also have to look at what a jury in Baltimore City is going to do. We had a grand jury about a year ago who refused to indict any cannabis or marijuana related cases, even if there were multiple firearms involved in the case. We have juries where if someone has 3 ounces and it's a half ounce over the 2.5 ounces, is that a good use of BPD and the state's attorney's resources trying to get that particular case indicted? I mean, and that's why this is a case why we have drug treatment courts in the district court and the circuit courts. We have the availability of citations being issued so that we're not pulling officers off the street for a case that may or may not get through the gauntlet of grand jury, petite jury, and a judge who ultimately is going to sentence on a 3-ounce marijuana case, So we try to take all that into consideration, and we've coordinated with BPD quite a bit, particularly in the area of marijuana. So.
Yeah, but I just know in my district, everything above Wildwood Parkway, going to the county line, that's all they sell is marijuana. And so they're actually standing outside and they're selling marijuana. So if it's not worth the resources, then what is the solution?
Well, I'm going to let Deputy Commissioner
Yes,
Jones.
so for BPD, I will say this is, you mentioned, marijuana in reference to, the cannabis stores, the legalization of it to a certain extent. I will say that for us, right, there has been a perception amongst members of the community who are involved with street level sales that they don't want to hear about the federal government and it's illegal there. Some people's perception is marijuana is legal and everybody is using it. And I think that me personally, Kevin Jones, we've gone down a slippery slope where there's miseducation on this, right? So you do have people, and we see it on citywide cameras, where individuals are literally pulling out Ziploc bags full of marijuana and selling it, right? There's a misconception and there's an education piece that needs to be done in reference to that, right? So for us, when an officer sees that, they're going to make that arrest. And I want them to make that arrest. What happens after that arrest is what happens after that arrest, right? And we work well with our state attorney's partners because we have monthly meetings with Tom and his team. When it comes to education in reference to legal parameters that may have changed, this is addressed through BPD, through our in-service training, as well as legal updates delivered through electronically through our Power DMS system. But when officers see these interactions, they are expected to address it, and that's what we're telling them to do.
Thank you.
I have a question, and I guess it's a shared question between maybe BPD and the state's attorney's office. So the last two major takedowns that we had were the 1800 boys and the Dickey Land boys. I'm curious how we got along to prioritizing them, and sort of what led to those major cases. Did they come in as complaints? Were they violent groups that we particularly need to focus on? How do we decide to focus on them, and
Yeah, so
how do we
I
handle
don't have
the case?
LTC Velty here who runs my anti-crime section. While we can't go too much into those things for reasons of some things are still being adjudicated, he will go through a process of how we prioritize and how we tier investigations.
Yeah, good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Velte. I oversee our anti-crime section, which houses the Group Violence Reduction Unit. So those two specific takedowns that you were referring to, they are prioritized, and those groups are done so out of our weekly violence review, where the GVRS districts come and present shootings and homicides for the prior week. We go through all of them. And as we digest that information, we're looking at what groups are either driving it on the victim side or driving it on the suspect side. And we kind of put a map together of, okay, what groups and in which GVR districts are driving the violence. And they're actually scorecarded out, so you have a visual reference. And generally, the top one or two in the districts will be taken on by the group violence unit for a couple of things for outreach, followed up by enforcement actions if outreach and offering of services is unsuccessful. Those two groups post the outreach and services aspect continued to drive violence, and they were targeted for a comprehensive investigation.
So they were part of GVRS?
Correct.
Got it. Please, go ahead, Director.
Just to share a few things, I think first, Stephanie Mevron is Director of Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. Thank you for having us here for this conversation today. I want to go back to something you said kind of contextually at the beginning, Council Chair, which was the fact that we could even have this conversation today, we have been really focused on violence, and you just heard an example from Lieutenant Colonel where we see a clear intersection between open-air drug shops and violence. That has largely been our focus and what the prioritization has been. But I want to make sure that we're really clear that since we've been having this conversation in the council behind the scenes, whether in police stat on a biweekly basis, whether in the city administrators interagency or multi-agency task force meetings, we're consistently talking about the intersection of drug corners, quality of life, public safety, and what we can do to disrupt that. I think to the deputy commissioner's point, there may be an opportunity, understanding that we're not going to publish a map, right, of specific locations and say this is the specific enforcement activity we're taking, but there is a strategy, there is kind of a way that we're diagnosing those problems, there is a way we're prioritizing them and determining where there are good candidates for engagement, other services, where appropriate. I think what I've seen from at least the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement perspective, emphasis on the engagement, is that we've seen some opportunities in this space. We have had, whether we're talking about the group violence reduction strategy and intersections in those districts, or whether we're talking about our neighborhood stabilization response efforts, where an open-air drug shop is a part of that work. We've had some success stories. I have members of the team here, I think represented from every single lane at Monty, from victim services to community engagement, to community violence intervention and GVRS. So they can certainly, speak a little more to that if that's of interest. But I want to share, where there are opportunities, there's also been some challenges. I think we've seen, just taking a couple of the cases, whether we're talking about the engagement work on Greenmount and Venable, Edmondson and the West Side Shopping Center, 32nd Street, East Baltimore down the hill, talking about our, I see our Peace Team and Embrace Initiative partners in the work. We put ARPA funding into some of their engagement around Lexington Market, which showed, I think, an 86% decrease in open air activity over the time that they were engaging. We're seeing some of the things that work. I think we have work to do to make sure we can invest in that at scale and in appropriate ways that are responsive to each location. I think one of the other things I would share here is that it's relationship based. So just taking the West Side Shopping Center example, we're talking about cannabis sales. We were able to make some engagement with those young people out there. I think maybe in the instance of one or two of those young people, we were able to connect them to a job opportunity that allowed them to not be outside anymore. Were we able to reach every single person in that group? Were we able to successfully make that pitch to everyone? No, but were we able to start to do things that also start to build trust with some of the people who are outside by saying, you need help with like basic identification, you need help with making a resume, like whatever it may be, you need help getting maybe official employment for the first time in your life, we can provide some services to support that. We're often doing that work on the ground in partnership with other agencies like Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement. We're sometimes doing that in partnership with the Peace Team. I think we saw a lot of success with the Peace Team in partnership with Moame and Monty on the ground on 32nd Street in a way that we're not continuing to see that same activity persist. But there's challenges too, because we're seeing, sometimes we're effective in that engagement, maybe it goes away for a time, we might see it pop up in another location where there's less engagement attention. And so there is a need for us to be discussing this as we are on an ongoing weekly, bi-weekly basis with the police department, with our other service providers, with other agencies. Happy to answer questions and have the team speak to any of those things, more specifically. But I think just wanted to say from a Monty perspective, we recognize this as a quality of life concern that impacts public safety. We don't want anyone to feel like they can't walk and engage in their neighborhoods, and we stand ready to continue to partner with anyone on the council around specific locations so that we can really develop that tailored strategy that involves the police department, that involves the state's attorney's office. And also as we scale GVRS, we're gonna see the intersection of more of these issues as well. I think we're already seeing, just being in the 4 districts that we're in with GVRS right now, we know that there are groups from one of those districts that have set up shop in a district that's not currently in GVRS, and we're still finding ways to bring appropriate enforcement action against those groups. So we want to make sure the violence is continuing to drive our prioritization, but we also do not want any community, business, corridor to feel like there's a lack of safety because of the way people are engaging outside. And for those priority issues, those are the kind of things that we can work directly with, each of you on the council to develop a plan around that involves all of these agencies.
Director, I appreciate pretty much everything you said. And I think even more specifically, given the question we had about the two groups that we took down recently or in the last couple of years, and sometimes a little bit more nuance of an approach here, I think we realize we have multiple tools to use here. Sometimes that is a full takedown and enforcement. Sometimes that is something on that spectrum, and sometimes it's something on the complete other end of the spectrum where, maybe we can provide opportunities and resources and help them consider otherwise. What I would like to see is an understanding of what those tools are, an understanding of when we want to use that spectrum of tools, because not everybody is going to get a GVRS response. We don't have the resources to respond with GVRS every single time. Sometimes it's community partners. Sometimes it's literally just an officer getting out and walking down the street, a couple times a day. But I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that nuance, and that's what I want to see out of whatever our solution should be here. Part of what you can sense is frustration on my behalf is I want this to feel as important to the folks in this room as it feels to certainly myself and the constituents that were very upset with me at the last town hall that I had. The discomfort that I hope you're feeling right now and me pressing on this issue is probably half or a quarter of what I saw in my own town hall. And I had to stand up there and ask questions or answer questions about a strategy that I did not have at hand.
Yeah. And Mr. Chair, I want to be clear that this is important to us. Like, I don't want that to be the message that comes out of this hearing.
And
this is important to the
I'm not
administration.
suggesting that. I want to be
Okay.
clear. I'm not suggesting
Okay.
that it's not important, but what I don't see is a plan. And I think a plan or a strategy or an approach that when people ask me how we're addressing said issue, that I can point to and say, oh, this is what we're doing here. When it comes to violent crime across the city or guns or shooting, I can point to that plan. We got a whole thing on the website. We have tons of research on why we're taking that approach. We have a bunch of partners, some of which are in this room, that can speak at length on what we're doing around violent crime across the city. We do not have that for open air drug markets, and I understand it's a nuanced problem, but it's not okay for us not to have a plan. And so I want to figure out what that is, and I'm happy to begin working toward that. It could take us a month, it could take us 6 months, but what I don't want to end up is I continue to bring this issue up and we don't know what we're doing about it. So that's what I'm looking for. I know Councilman Blanchard had a question. I want to hand off to him, and then Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question, then a comment. The question, and I think I asked this at last month's hearing, and I apologize if someone got back to me and I missed it. But so the narcotics arrest, are those exclusively for distribution or intent to distribute, or are there any arrests involved with like use?
If you give me a chance to go back to my slides, there was a breakdown of felony versus misdemeanor.
Which we broke down based on your question the last time. Because if you remember, the last time we were here, Councilman, you asked us to break that down. We just had drug arrests. So we have broken them down to the felony arrests and the misdemeanor arrest because you asked for that.
But I guess of the misdemeanor arrest, are those are they all distribution related? Or are they use related?
So usually, and I can't speak to the state's attorney's office, but I used to be there. So our felony arrests are usually the possession with intent to distribute, the distribution, and the misdemeanors are generally use, and oftentimes they're quantity-based, right? So, it's whether or not you can show this is a personal use or whether or not this is, and sometimes there are other things, right, indicative of, and they can speak to it better than I can, but obviously if you have, baggies, scales, like, it's going to look different. I think we've always tried to stay away from a number, as I'm sure that the state's attorney's office, because back in the day, I believe that, my clients as a criminal defense lawyer knew the number. So I think they can speak to it, but that is why we broke down the slides that way.
Thank you for clarifying that, for following up on it. And so I guess the follow-up question on the misdemeanor cases, I know that the state's attorney, I've heard him talk about diversion programs and whatnot. Can you talk through how that is going?
So yeah, to be clear, misdemeanors are, use actually isn't against crime, it's possession of it that's against the law. So possession, attempted distribution, which is still a misdemeanor, and possession with intent to distribute marijuana is now a misdemeanor. The felonies are distribution, manufacture, possession with intent to distribute any of the other narcotics. And then we get into kingpin weights. We get, if the weight is sufficient, you start seeing mandatories put in. As far as the diversion, we have multiple mechanisms. One is a district court drug docket, which has its next graduation, I think March 19th, which is very soon here. We have a circuit court drug treatment court, and then again we have the citation docket that we use when as people are cited for the offenses. The drug treatment court docket is fairly robust. If you need specifics on that, I can certainly get it to you. That doesn't fall squarely under my umbrella of special, that's a specialty court. We can certainly get you any data you wanted on that, but they're fairly robust programs. We have prosecutors from the district and circuit assigned solely to that court. And those are for the nonviolent offenders that find themselves either with felonies or misdemeanors that are just a pure drug variety. Just to set kind of the baseline, that when we got here on January 3rd, 2023, we had a whole generation of prosecutors who had never tried drug cases. We had an entire district court that didn't know how to enter into evidence a drug analysis report, or how to examine the chemist on what that report meant. One of the things we've done in our office, and the two people sitting to my left have been really on the front lines of it, is that we built out and trained our prosecutors on drug cases, our felony narcotics unit, in order to facilitate much more cooperation and efficiency with BPD, modeled it after the BPD districts. We have prosecutors assigned to individual districts, and that's greatly enhanced the ability for both BPD and our prosecutors to pick up the phone and communicate with one another. So that system is working, fairly well from our perspective. When we came on the felony side, we had about 119 cases per prosecutor when we got here, and they're down in, somewhere in the 50s right now. They are climbing because our narcotics unit also is in charge of we just moved in July, we moved all of our guns, felon in possession, prohibited person guns, down to the narcotics unit. So they've taken on that responsibility to free up our GVED unit to handle just non-fatal shootings, more along the lines of our homicide unit. So the build out in the state's attorney's office has certainly created a much better working relationship with BPD on just the communication, to be able to, if we get a citizen complaint, one of the amazing things we had is a citizen complaint that was very specific, where a stash was. It was near a church, a specific stash location, specific cars that were involved, and that district prosecutor was able to just call someone. An officer went through and found a fairly massive stash without having to arrest anybody, but from our reports from the original person who complained is it disrupted that drug corner just with that simple action. So that's where the communication, I think, is excellent between our agencies and Muncie. I mean, we had a takedown that we did in the North Broadway where it was mainly just drugs, and Muncie did a tremendous job of going in there and stabilizing that area so that we didn't see the backfill. So I think all the partner agencies are working very well together with respect to this particular issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. That's really helpful. And then I'll reach out to the state attorney's office directly to kind of just learn more about this whole process. So, but that was really informative. And I want to be super clear, certainly for myself, I mean, probably for the council as a whole, our interest in open air drug markets, certainly should not be interpreted in any way as, I speak for myself, but as interest in like criminalizing addiction type of things, right? Like that probably goes without saying, but just to be on the record for that. And that's where my question is coming from with that specifically. But I do recognize that, sometimes, potentially a misdemeanor or whatever can be an effective aspect of a diversion program or something like that. And I'm interested in learning more about that. The comment I have, probably best directed to Mr. Schnella for the mayor's office. I've gotten some feedback from Embrace specifically, where they have incoming financial cliffs with ARPA monies drying out, DHCD's money's going away. Federal funds are obvious concerns there. And for my district, that's both the Lexington Market area and the Pennsylvania Avenue area. They fund work up there as well. And something that a really big piece of admiration that I have for the mayor and for the administration is the really intentional focus on empowering the people who have the shared lived experience, who come from the community, to be involved in engaging people here. And I'm really worried over the next 6 to 9 months that we will be able to find funds we don't want these groups that are doing this work to have to stop come July 1st or October 1st because the money goes away. And that's the point about 86% reduction in the Lexington Market area, whatever that data was. Just making sure that we have some way of lining up the funds in a timely manner and not, a year or two down the road here is something that I'm sure y'all are looking at, but I just want to raise that point as being really important.
Thank you.
Schleifer.
Thank you. Director Mavronos, if you can just elaborate a little bit, you were saying that you'd want to partner with the city council, but then you also were saying that you guys are operating in 4 different parts of the city. So how could we partner on locations that are drug spots in our district? Because I know I've sent some over in the past, and so I'm just wondering how we can partner if you guys aren't operating in those areas.
GVRS is in 4 districts in the city. I know your district is not currently in the GVRS catchment zone, but that doesn't mean that we can't work together using some of our other tools in our toolkit. So neighborhood stabilization response, that's one of the ways that we've been engaging. It gives us a chance to build directly with community, with governmental partners like yourself. We don't need GVRS to be there to do that kind of coordinated interagency work.
Gotcha. And so how are you selecting the corners and the open air drug markets that you're choosing to work on?
So typically we're not choosing based on a specific drug corner, but we may be in an area identifying that we're going to stabilize because of a recent act of violence. And then once we're there in that catchment zone, we see there is an active drug shop right here in the middle of this, or that's I guess an area that is driving more violence or has the potential to be violent. We see a lot of people outside. It's destabilizing the community. We're hearing complaints from neighbors. And so that's when we would actually start to do some of that engagement. I can have some of my team talk a little bit about what that's looked like in a few specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, I know from previous hearings, but my question is more just how are you selecting them? Are you going off of which areas have the most violence, or where there's the most incidents taking place, shootings, homicides, most 911 calls? What metrics are you going off of?
So for us specifically, we'll stabilize post major law enforcement takedown. So wherever that takedown happens, if it's related to GVRS, whether it's in or outside of a GVRS district, we'll activate a stabilization after that. And so where that intersects, we're not looking at a map, for example, of drug corners and saying this is the ones we're going to pick. Typically, as a mayor's office, we're getting direct either constituent or elected official requests for engagement, partnership around a shared strategy, and then working together with that elected official, that community-based organization on a specific plan.
So, I mean, shouldn't those resources and efforts be directed to the spots that have the highest crime and the highest violence, and that be the metric, not, you know, who called and asked for it or what specific area is it in? I know I have open air drug market in my district, which I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of, that's far more violent and dangerous than all the examples that you gave prior about the different locations that you guys have had success in. So at what point do we get to the metrics and just follow that and focus on where the highest crimes are? I mean, if DOT started putting up traffic signals and traffic calming in areas that had no accidents or had very few traffic-related incidents, people would be quite frustrated and say that's a waste of resources, right? They go and they do traffic studies and they say, well, there's a lot of people speeding here and there's a lot of accidents on this intersection, so let's put all these tools, whether it's a traffic signal, whether it's a stop sign, whether it's speed bumps, one of the tools in the toolkit, let's put it there and go off of that metric. So how come this isn't being done that same way, where we know what the most dangerous areas are in the city, where there's the most open air drug market? So when you're saying, okay, you know, we're now going to be putting resources around these 4 locations to address open air drug markets, that you just go after the ones that have the most incidents in those locations.
So I guess I understand what you're saying, and I would love to discuss further with you the specific location that you're talking about in your district. I see these locations prioritized in police stat beatings. I see our deputy mayor for public safety saying we clearly see an intersection between open air drug sales at this location or in this district and violence that we're seeing. And so those are one of the ways that we're looking at the data on a regular biweekly basis and determining where we put those efforts. The extent to which our agency is involved will depend according to the particulars of that situation.
So who's making the decision on which of those areas to deploy to? Because you're saying it's, you know, when you get calls from the community and
That's
areas
just one metric.
That's, yeah, but I'm saying there's also, you're saying about certain areas that are destabilized. I mean, what I've seen, that more, the areas that you actually receive the least calls from, you know, they've often, you know, just have given up. And I think that the metric is a very simple metric. I mean, where's the violence? Where's the shooting? Where's the homicides? You look at the heat map of where that is around the city, it will directly correlate to these open air drug markets and different gang activity. So I guess so my question is, who specifically, you have limited resources, you know what resources you have and how many locations you can work on at a given time. Who makes the decision what you're gonna do next? So you're done working at the locations you're at today, who's deciding what you're doing tomorrow?
So that would happen in a couple ways. There's 2 things I'll share with you. The first is for Coordinated Neighborhood Stabilization Response. That initiative, it's a citywide initiative. We have certain events which might trigger a response. So I mentioned major law enforcement takedowns with GVRS. That's always going to be an activating event for us to initiate a stabilization. In addition to that, we're reviewing youth-involved homicides, police-involved shootings, mass shootings, and other areas where we're seeing a rapid acceleration of violence. In addition to those sort of triggers that would lead to us activating a neighborhood stabilization response. Muncie in 2025 has been working to increase our internal coordination across our lanes and our agency. And so one of the ways we do that, we have a weekly review where we're looking at every single shooting and homicide across the city, regardless of whether it's in a GVRS district or not. And from there, if we're seeing repeat events at certain intersections, repeat events at different corners, that space is giving us the flexibility to say, you know what, we're going to engage with our partners at BPD on this. What do they know about the violence that's happening here, and can we play a role in helping disrupt it? And so we're being much more proactive, and I would like to ensure that we can work together on, one or more of these issues in your district.
So to answer my question, who decides where you go next?
I'll decide. So we have for our resources specifically, but it's afterward having a diagnosis, we're having a conversation about.
That's a conversation for a different
Some
time.
are more appropriate for us, some may be more appropriate for a law enforcement
Gotcha.
partner.
So you decide what locations Muncie's tools are deployed in, and you also decide how long you stay there.
Correct. And sometimes we're getting, priority locations that we may be given word from the mayor, the city administrator, the deputy mayor for public safety that says, hey, we need you to put an emphasis on this location too. So
And when they do that, do you immediately respond to that request?
if it's coming from the mayor and city administrator, we would respond.
Gotcha. And so at what point do you respond to a council request with the same request?
There's a number of Councilman Conway, I know we talk consistently about specific issues in his district. There are other members not reflected here today that I've talked to about specific locations. So I would say that's a ongoing basis. I can't think of a situation where we've turned, down that partnership.
Yeah, I've given examples and we can talk about specific locations offline, but if I give you a location, as soon as this hearing is over, how quickly can I assume that you guys are going to deploy resources to that location?
What do you mean when you say deploy resources? Because I would say our first step would be to do a diagnosis. We would want to get on the ground and understand what is animating that particular situation so that we can tailor a strategy to that.
Great. So, there's open air drug markets. There's one in my district that is older than you and I. Everybody knows about it. And so it's just as well known as really anything else in Baltimore. And so it's not in those specific areas that you guys necessarily typically work in. And I understand you're talking about different triggers, but the only trigger that I'm talking about is when somebody pulls the trigger. So if you look at that location, you will see that it has higher crime and more like drug dealing, shootings, homicides than many of the locations that you currently service. And so what I'm trying to understand is what it looks like for you when you're in a location and you stabilize it and everything looks good, how long till you get to the next spot? Because what it seems like from what I'm hearing is that there's certain areas that are taking precedence and priority, and it's being done in an inequitable manner because when you have communities that have that higher crime and have been historically disinvested in, and they're not getting those resources sometimes because of their proximity to neighborhoods that may be safer. How do we get that attention to that and that we actually just follow the metrics? Because clearly that, from what I'm hearing, that this is not based on those metrics.
I would say it is based on the metrics.
Councilman, how about we do this and hopefully this resolves, I think, what you're trying to get to. It sounds like you have some pointed issues in your district that you want the director to follow up with the types of resources that she's speaking to.
No, I think I'd like to make a committee request if possible.
Sure.
So my request would be, you mentioned some of those locations. If you can provide a list of the locations that you have deployed full resources, not a specific, triggered event where there was an incident and you guys responded out to that for a short period of time. I'm talking about the real strategic going after a location and you got results there. If you can provide those locations as well as how many violent incidents took place at those locations that triggered your response to those locations.
But you don't want the locations that we initiated because we triggered a response?
No, I want to know
want all
the
of them.
areas that you have responded with your tools in your toolkit to do a long-term solution to address those locations.
Okay.
I would like to understand how much violent crime was in that location, how many shootings there were, how many homicides there were in those corridors before you responded out to them.
And how
Okay?
much time before are you looking?
We can take a year, 3 years, whatever's, it really doesn't matter, because what I've seen is historically, these locations that are problematic, the worst ones in the city have been problematic for many years. And so if you take 1 year before you went out to those places, I'd like to know how many shootings and homicides were in that corridor during that given year, or if you plan a couple years in advance. I'll leave that metric to you, whether you decide to do a 1 year or 3 year. I'd like to just see how many shootings and homicides you are. You mentioned a couple locations like Edmondson Village. So I just want to see what those numbers look like so that I can compare it to other locations that have higher numbers to see when we can get resources to those locations as well.
Director, do you understand the request?
Yes, I think I understand, and just would say for every single location, whether it's one that our team is looking at the data holistically and saying, this is an area that needs to have some kind of presence of our resources, whether it's an area where we had an activating event that led to that stabilization, the first thing we're doing is we're getting on the ground knowledge about what is our assessment of the location, how can we diagnose it, and we're pairing that with data and metrics. We're looking at the 911 calls. We're looking at the violent crime data and the type of incidents that are happening. So I don't want to give the impression that data and analysis is not a part of that. But the last thing I would say about that is when we're talking about some of these activating events, part of the reason why we mobilize immediately, part of that decision is around, is there something specific in that incident that could lead to retaliation or re-victimization immediately after? And so that may or may not be connected to specific violence that happened in the year or 3 years before in that location, but there could be a relationship.
So,
Yeah, but I mean, hold on,
Councilman-
on that one
Councilman,
note.
I want to make sure, Councilman Gray's been very patient. I want to make sure we.
Hold on
I want-
one
I want-
sec.
Councilman, I want to make sure we have the request, and then I'll come back to you, I promise.
So I'll restate the request.
Okay.
So the councilman wants to know the areas that Monty has responded to with their tools. How many shootings and homicides have taken place in those locations prior to Monty's activation in those areas? And then Monty can determine the metric either a year or 3 years.
Correct.
All right, Councilman, I will come back to you, I promise. Councilman Gray.
Thank you. And just before I start, I just want to say, I just want to give a quick shout out to Muncie and all the work that you have done, just not in my district, but all over, especially in response to Deontay Dorsey, who tragically lost his life. Folks like Rick and other people really showed up and have been there and continue to be there. I want to go back to the situation in which I talked about earlier, and not just Harper on just my district, because I don't think that's fair, because I think this happens everywhere. If we have a situation where someone is actively selling drugs, but it is not a quantitative amount where the state attorney offices feels as though they should take the case, are we looking at the citation docket as the way to go? And this is a question, I guess, for both of you guys, as for the state's attorney's office and for police. In those situations where you see someone like actively selling drugs, you take down the person, you see that it's 2.5, or if it's over 2.5, but it's not enough to that, when you send them downtown, state's attorney's office says no. Do you guys go back and review and then have policy that state like, hey guys, if it's over 2.5 ounces but under a pound, we're not arresting that person. We're just going to give them we'll just give them a citation. And then for the state's attorney's office, are you sending the directive back to like, hey guys, anything that's under a pound, under 2 pounds, I'm just making up a number at this point, we're not going to take, so we suggest that you guys give them a citation.
So for BPD, for clarity, we're not giving a citation for drug sales. If we believe someone is selling drugs, they get arrested. At that point, they go through the judicial system.
And then what say you?
So depending on the circumstances, there's not one rule for whether we prosecute a marijuana case or not. I mean, there's a number of different variations that we have explored and talked about. So there's no one rule of what's going to happen with that. If it's simply a possession, or if it doesn't meet the criteria for a possession with intent, it could be abated by arrest, which means they lose the marijuana, they lose the money, even though they're going back out. For marijuana, it's a much more complicated, it's not a binary yes or no answer. And I think it would require a little bit more conversation to flesh it out, which I'm happy to have with you, but there's many variables that go into whether we're gonna move forward on a marijuana case or not.
Okay, and I highlight that only because what we hear is the citation docket, in essence, is to handle those types of cases, but I feel like there needs to be more of a fleshing out of protocol, because if I was a police officer, I would feel demoralized if I'm doing my job. If I'm Muncie and I'm out here trying to stabilize an area and I'm doing my job, but at the end of the day, someone is openly selling drugs, they get caught, and then they're being released because at this point, you guys are like, we have other big cases that we're solving, and we know that when they get in front of, your team, your amazing team, you guys make sure that, when someone does the crime, they are actually, they go to jail. But once again, I just think that, one, that sends a bad message. But secondly, if they were to go through the citation docket, they are giving resources, they're giving alternatives, they're giving community service. Are we doing that in these cases? Because I feel like that would be a simple solution. And I don't know if you can go into like the reasons why that does or does not happen, but I feel like if the police see someone actively selling drugs and you guys say, hey, this is not enough for us to take it to trial, to just simply let someone go sends the wrong message when you have in the citation docket and you have this policy where we're giving people community service, we're giving people services, we're giving people these resources to get out of the life, but it only works if we give you a citation. So like, are you guys actually doing that when the person's down in central booking as well?
I guess at central booking, no, there's no services offered from the central booking facility. I think 2 points just to, because I think they're relevant to the question you're asking. First of all, there's so many different variations of marijuana. One of the things that unfortunately we're seeing is people with lawful wear carry permits with firearms selling marijuana on the street. So that changes the calculus. That changes, are we gonna go forward on a case or not? There's a lot of variations that really inform our decision whether we are going to move forward on a marijuana case. I will tell you that the wire that went up last year that had a 40-person takedown started with marijuana. That was the original thing that caught everybody's attention. That entire investigation started with marijuana. So there's a lot of different dynamics with marijuana in particular, and it's complicated with the fact that it's lawful to a certain extent. So I'd be happy to have a longer conversation with you about that, certainly, but.
I definitely appreciate that, and I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to reiterate once again that when there's CCTV and you find someone with different baggies of different, like that is the intent to distribute. And if that person's being released and that person isn't given resources, then that person's not being punished. The only thing you've given that person, it was literally like an hour and a half break. You gave them a lunch and then they go right back and stand on the corner again. So I'm very interested to follow up and continue that, but I think that it's a huge problem, once again, if we're not giving folks the resources as if they were to go through the citation docket. But the police actually find someone doing something with evidence in a CCTV camera. I don't know, I just think there should be some type of recourse other than that person just coming back to the shopping center to stand in front of Royals to impede me from buying my chicken box.
I think I know what case you're talking about, but maybe afterwards I could get a little more details into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right. Seeing no further questions, I'll say this first. I am glad that we are able to talk about this issue today because we have seen significant progress specifically on violence. This, frankly, although this may have been an uncomfortable conversation, is a luxury. That said, I think we have some significant work to do here, and I really look forward to working with all you guys. You guys are incredibly capable and smart, and I think with a concerted effort can pull together a plan that makes sense. As I have heard you talk about this issue just here, I've been thinking about the different levels of drug shops. Some of them are drug shops that are violent and need everything that we can throw at it. Some of them are unstable, but not necessarily violent yet and may need some attention. Some of them are stable, and although they may be a nuisance, may not necessarily warrant a full force effort. It may have a need for maybe some of MONSE's resources or harm reduction approach, and some of them, there may not be drugs in those neighborhoods and don't need this attention. Nevertheless, I do think it's really important as we continue to try to make sure we meet the needs of our constituents and our residents and address the concerns that we've been hearing in our streets and our neighborhoods, that we think about how we want to resolve these issues, how we want to talk about it, and what our plan will be going forward. So I look forward to hearing back from the administration about a proper timeline to pull that together. I look forward to also being a partner. I have a ton of ideas on this issue and would be happy to share those with you guys. But I just want to make sure that we do address the issue. So with that, this hearing is on recess, and I appreciate you all.